Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, whether it's in person or online via Facebook. I'm Stacy Teicher-Cateru, and I'm a reporter with the Christian Science Monitor's Equal Ed project, where we focus on education equity issues. And we've got a great panelists here today to join us for a discussion about reimagining schools. I've been doing some reporting here in New Hampshire about the competency-based education system that the state has been moving towards and other innovations here and around the country, which I found the real underlying theme of that is helping students become critical thinkers, really preparing for an unpredictable world in the future, preparing them to be lifelong learners. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. There are a lot of different ways to get at it, and the educators here are going to share some of those ideas with you. But it's really about this idea, some people call it deeper learning. So we're going to explore sort of the why and the how of that today. So first of all, I want to let you know that we do want to take the conversation also wherever you want it to go. You have an opportunity to interact with our panelists here by sending in a question on Facebook or asking a question from the audience. And we've got somebody who will be moderating and bringing those questions to us. So please send those in at any time. Let me thank the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College for this beautiful space for hosting us today, and the Education Writers Association for a fellowship grant that supported some of my reporting on this issue and this event today. Also behind the scenes, we have Melissa Braille and some of her students from Manchester School of Technology right nearby. They are in digital media and production courses at the high school, and they're helping out behind the scenes with our Christian Science Publishing Society staff. And thanks so much for all of your help with the event today. So let me get to introducing our panelists to you. We're going to start at the far end here with David Roof. He's the executive director of the Great Schools Partnership based in Portland, Maine. And one of the things they do is operate a League of Innovative Schools. And that operates across multiple states. He'll tell you more about that. Karen Hannigan Machado is the principal of Manchester School of Technology High School. It has a career and technical education core, but it's one of the great examples of competency-based education here in the state and other innovations that they're working on that she'll share with you today. Hope Nichols is going into her junior year, is that right? At MST, we'll call it for short. And Sarah Cantrell is a teacher at Maple Street Magnet School in Rochester, New Hampshire. She works with elementary age students. And there's a lot of personalized learning and innovative assessment going on there that she's going to share with us today. So I'll kick off with some questions, and then we'll open it up and have questions from the audience. David, why don't you start with some of the big picture context about this idea of how schools are innovating, how they're preparing them for lifelong learning today.
Sure. Thanks, Stacy. Good morning, everybody, and good morning those of you who are out there on Facebook. I would actually start with a couple of issues I think we're trying to resolve here and when we think about these changes we're going through. And you actually hit upon this a little bit when you opened up, Stacy. One of the key pieces is we need to have an educational system that ensures that every student gets deep learning. And historically, we've had a system that we were satisfied with that enabled some kids to get deep and rich learning and some kids to just kind of get through and go off for another role in life. And we actually had roles in life for students who that happened to. But the reality is those roles are no longer there. And so we need every student to have deep, rich learning that takes place. And that's a need not only for those individual students, obviously it's a big concern for them and their families, but it's a concern for all of us because as a community, we need to be able to support everybody here or else we're going to be trying to rally around some of those issues that we were trying to catch up on later. So one is everybody needs to be better educated at a deeper level. The second piece that's happening here is what we mean by a deeper level is actually more complex than it was before. So for an example of a simplistic example of that, there's little doubt that we want all kids to know how to read well. The real question is what we mean by well. And being able to read well has actually become a significantly more complex task as we're asking kids to manipulate ideas, to understand ideas, to to be able to negotiate between ideas they agree with and ideas they don't agree with, and all that's a part of deeper learning that has to take place. So all of this is based on the premise that we've got to have, we have to educate every child, and what we mean by deeper learning is actually gotten significantly more complex. So with that in mind, the strategy that is starting to really take hold across the country is this idea of better figuring out how to personalize learning for all kids. And so instead of saying, here's the door, and you come through the door, and we tell you what to do, and do the same thing day after day after day, and I, as the fountain of all knowledge, as your teacher, tell you what to do about that, we actually have to switch that around and start looking and figuring out how do students learn in different ways, and recognize and value that different learning that takes place. So there are two key components to that we have to implement on that. One is, Stacey, you talked about this earlier about competency, which is at its core, it's stating, here's what we want kids to know and be able to do, and we're going to design learning around that. And we're not going to design learning around the start time, the end time, the classes that we have. We're going to design it around, these are the things we want you to know and be able to do. That's actually a fairly common strategy that's out there in the world outside of schools. So when students go, young people go to get their driver's test, we don't say, because you went through the course, because you worked really hard, because we like you, you get a driver's test. We say, no, because you actually demonstrate the skills and the knowledge that we associate with being able to drive well, we give you a driver's license. We're actually following that same thing with competency of saying, let's get clear about what we want kids to know and be able to do, and let's design our system around that. The second piece of that is, once we design the system around that, we can open up the pathways for learning. So it's not so much that I care that a student sits here and reads the textbook, I care that a student understands the concepts. And if a student gets that by reading the textbook, fabulous. If a student gets that by doing an internship, fabulous. If a student gets that by designing a project that he or she does, fabulous. So we can open up the pathways for learning because we have the constant about what we want kids to be able to know and be able to do. And then, and I would say as we look across the country, what we're seeing, these concepts are really actually gaining steam rapidly. And so nationally, probably over half of the states right now have policies and support structures in place to try to promote these ideas, either pushing them forward with the concepts, actually getting into classrooms and helping teachers do that, changing policies so that it's more advantageous to enable to do those pieces, opening up pilot programs and innovation programs to be able to do that. So we're seeing that across the country. Certainly, there's a heavy concentration in the Northeast, but I'm pleased to note that it's actually all around. So it's not like we can say it's just here and it's a crazy thing that's happening here. It's a thoughtful thing that's happening here, and those same thoughtful things are happening around the country. Locally, there are 123 schools that are involved in the League of Innovative Schools now. That is a program that we run in conjunction with the New England Secondary School Consortium, which is a collaboration of the State Departments of Education in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And those schools have committed to personalizing learning, to figuring out how to implement competency, to creating multiple pathways for kids, whether those be, again, internships, in-classroom learning, things that get kids design, early college or dual enrollment programs, online learning, all these strategies essentially to get kids to those ends. And so we are seeing lots of the innovation that happens, lots of different ideas. I would end with a final piece. That innovation is consistently around the competency and the pathway strategy, but what that looks like on the ground will vary from place to place. And it should vary from place to place, because the strategies and the strengths of Manchester are different than the strategies and strengths of East Swansea. And so we should be looking and figuring out how can we as communities best educate kids, how can we use our resources, how can we design our resources, how can we make sure that they can own their learning and have agency over their learning that may look different from place to place and is all about that core knowledge we want kids to get.
Great, thank you so much for that overview. So Karen, you can tell us what it's like in one specific place, particularly the Manchester School of Technology. How have you incorporated some of these innovations in your school?
So we are entering into our 6th year. at MST, being an innovative high school. And what it looks like at our school is, again, different from many other schools because our main focus is the fact that we are a CTE center, or a career and technical education center. So a lot of the work regarding competencies actually stemmed out of this career and technical education because obviously we have students that always have to demonstrate their knowledge. We cannot have a student who's going to work in an auto shop that missed a month of school and forgot to catch up on how to install brakes. So we need to make sure the students have always been able to demonstrate. So therefore that was the main premise for starting our model in Manchester. So our school does look very different because we are competency-based, and when I always say we are truly competency-based because our students have to show mastery of every single competency for every single course that they have. So when our students graduate, I always say our students, there is no student out there that is average because our students have to show mastery of every single component of every single course. So every single student has a minimum GPA of 3.0. And that's a pretty amazing thing to be able to tell an audience that every student has a minimum GPA of 3.0 in order to graduate from the Manchester School of Technology High School. So what it looks like, and when we put our school together, there were certain tenets of our school that you had to have. As we said, in order to demonstrate mastery, we cannot put a timeline on that because that's different for different students. If a student is in there and working and trying and gaining mastery, not everybody is the same. Our motto is as fast as you want, but as slow as you need, because certain students need more time in certain subjects. And I think we've probably all been through that in the past with certain things we just feel like we were not experts at. So that broke the mold of a lot of different things when we began our school, such as timeline. So our students have extra time to master those components that they need to master. At the end of the school year, we do some credit recovery for those students who want to continue on, students that go into the next year and still complete competencies for a course that they started the year before. And that really has made a difference for a lot of students. So we also don't do textbooks. We have a certain courses like foreign language where the students will have a textbook, but all the rest of it is real-time learning. Our students are working on laptops, they're working in teamwork, they're presenting. One of the things that we're proud of is our students are able to get up there and present and demonstrate their mastery in many, many different ways. And like David was saying, it's how do we figure out the best way for a student. Our students have individualized learning plans, and that means that they are an individual and they don't all learn the same and they don't all demonstrate the same. So we have to develop those individualized learning plans for students. So there are a lot of different things that we're doing that may be different from the Manchester high schools, and we need to make sure more than anything that our students do have individualized learning plans and can demonstrate to us as they feel is best.
Thank you. So Hope, what is it like for you? What does it mean for you to have an individualized learning plan, or what works for you about this school?
The self-paced learning definitely helps me a lot because knowing that I don't have to keep up with the rest of my class takes a huge weight off of my shoulders, I guess. Because I remember in middle school when it's kind of the standard, everyone has to learn at the same pace, and it stressed me out a lot because I wasn't as quick as everyone else was, especially in math, and it was really hard for me to get through the year because I wasn't learning it as quickly as everyone else was. But at MST I can take as long as I need to finish a course to make sure I fully understand it, and that really does help me a lot, and it helps I learn easier at MST than I would anywhere else.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. So Sarah, you work with younger students, and I'm wondering when you're working with 3rd and 4th graders and you're thinking about this long-range goal of preparing them to be lifelong learners, preparing them with all these competencies that they need as a foundation for, as David was talking about, for the future that's out there that they can't just rely on some of the traditional old models of education. How do you keep that in mind when you're also helping them master some of the really basic skills like literacy and basic math?
It helps that we're a competency-based district. So we really have, a roadmap of what the students really need to know. We use project-based learning at our school and work really hard to get students out into the community where they're making real-world, meaningful connections to what they're learning. We do a lot with teaching them some of those executive functioning skills, like how do I learn? What does it mean to be an engaged learner? That takes a lot of work at that level, and I think the high school probably appreciates when that work happens at the younger age because it's so necessary. Because we can offer them these great projects, but if they don't know how to access the material and really process the information and make those deep connections, then it's a little bit for naught. But we're very fortunate at our school to have a lot of community involvement and parent involvement so that we can do these great projects that, yes, we're assessing the skills that they need to know in 3rd and 4th grade, but we're doing it in different ways, and we're documenting their learning in different ways, and the kids are making these great connections and pulling in different experiences that they've had. So it's not just, can I read to understand, but is what I'm reading meaningful and relevant, and I can make connections to my own life. So that's our goal, is to really help them see the value in what they're learning, to be able to kind of organize their minds around it and access it, and then use that to just keep growing.
Can you give us an example of one of the projects you've done with your kids and how you kind of pulled those elements together?
Sure. This year, one of our projects, it kind of spanned a long time actually, was looking at our town of Rochester, and we have, with project-based learning, we always have to have an essential question. So the essential question is, what are the great things happening in Rochester, and how do we spread the word? The students helped design the project and come up with a plan for how can we discover the great things. So they, together, we formulated a list of 5 questions that we went around to area businesses and asked them all the same questions. The kids generated the questions, like I said, but then also went around with a notebook. They were the interviewers. They had to document the responses from the businesses and really compile, like, what was the common theme? What were we hearing? What were all the great things that are happening? So they came back, processed that information, and then came up with a plan. Okay, so now we're hearing some of these great things happening in our town. How do we spread the word? So they wanted to do social media because that's kind of important to the kids this generation. So we formed a Facebook group and a Twitter group, and the kids decided to make sandwich boards that we could put around town. Area businesses could host them and write like great observations that are happening in our town. We reached out to newspaper reporters and did interviews. The kids got to be the experts on the great things happening in Rochester. And then, we've just continued that kind of led into another project where we were studying the Kachika River, which happens to wind through the center of our town, and looking at how healthy is our river by looking at macroinvertebrates. And they just made these great connections. So here's one example. They were being interviewed, and we were talking about the Stream Safari project, which is what we called the Kachika River study. And we were talking about the river is actually pretty clean, and the kids made a connection to the history that they had learned about. We used to be a mill town where factories were making shoes, and the dye was being dumped into the river a long time ago, and the kids made that connection that those macroinvertebrates probably wouldn't have lived in the river in that time. So just seeing them make those real-world connections and connecting projects from past, it's awesome.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pause briefly. Are there any questions so far from our audience here or our audience online? Yeah, okay. It looks like we've got an online question. So my colleague Gretel is going to be on the microphone. She works for the Christian Science Monitor, and she's going to represent our online questioners today.
Okay, we have a question from Bob from Facebook. He says, can we drill down into the definition of personalization? It too often gets conflated with individualized or adaptive. I'd like to hear how the panel understands it.
Personalization, okay.
I could give you some examples of part of what we try to do is not only take advantage of the students' personalized learning styles, but also what is their passion. And that's really what drives a lot of these students. When students come to MST, part of it is because they have career aspirations. And that makes all the difference in the world for a student to be able to participate in and do work in what they love. And when we can combine some of the academics with that, that makes a huge difference. So, for example, some of the things that we're doing, we are doing English and math, and we're pulling out some of those components of a CTE class. We know that everybody, all students need to be doing some sort of crosswalks of those academics within their CTE program. So we will have English and math teachers going into those academic areas and assisting students or working with or assisting the teacher and trying to have them be able to show students a little bit different way of doing things, but it's specialized. So when a student has a passion for a certain course, whether it be game design, whether it be our video program, and then you can add some of those academics in there, that makes it personalized for the student because they may not have been interested, like we hope we're saying, the math or maybe English, but when you say, I want you to write about your passion, that makes all the difference in the world for a student.
You know, I might jump in. I think it's a great question to try to figure out the difference in some of the language that's out there. A caveat I would put on there is I think across the country those terms are used sometimes interchangeably, and sometimes they mean the exact opposite of each other. You know, one person will say it's personalization, another person will say, no, it's individualization, it's very different, and you get to the core of it and they're talking the same thing. I think that the core piece to think about here is some of the things we want to make sure happen and some of the things we want to make sure don't happen. So first off, we're not arguing that it's a free-for-all. You know, anything you want to do, you can do it. It's great. There's a core there that says there are certain skills and knowledge that we want all kids to know and be able to do. And so if a student, again, go back to my original example, said, you know, I'm not into reading. I'm just not going to do reading. I don't want to do that. We would say, I'm sorry, that's really not an option. You are going to learn how to read well. The same way if a student said, you know, writing is just not my bag. I'm not going to do writing. Well, maybe you won't be James Joyce, but you will need to know how to write well. And so there are some baseline things that whether or not students say, I like those or I don't like those, these are skills and knowledge that all kids need to have. And we can testify to that, not because we're necessarily smarter than other people, but there's a wisdom of knowing what's out there that's necessary. The second piece I would put here is we know that success in life, a lot of it is about being able to collaborate, cooperate, work jointly with other people. The vast majority of what we do, there are parts of it that are, you know, I sit down, I really concentrate, I'm working by myself on something. But in most cases, I'm sharing that, I'm understanding it, I'm collaborating, I'm gathering good ideas from other people who can help me deepen my thinking on that. And so we don't want to set up a system that essentially says in a classroom, there are 25 little individual things going on and kids are all working by themselves all the way through here and filling out these worksheets as they go through on that. That's actually not a good learning model. We want to recognize, as Karen has talked about, the different strengths in learning the kids have, but we also want to have them work together. We want them to grow with each other. We want them to use the wisdom of other students in the classroom to deepen their own learning. We want them to use the wisdom of the teachers who are in the classroom to deepen their learning. We want them to use the wisdom of people in the community to deepen their learning. So it's both it's a recognition that every individual person is different, learns in different ways, and we want to have both that individual time and that collaborative time in order to be able to move that work forward. So instead of getting stuck on the, you know, is it personalization, is it individualization, again, which can be confusing, it's getting clear about what we want kids to know and be able to do and figuring out ways that we can help each and every kid get to those ends.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add to that, you know, having that common goal. What are the skills that we want them to learn and to demonstrate? And the personalization comes in how they access those skills, how they access the material, as well as how they demonstrate that they've learned that skill. And I think that's where you can personalize it a little bit more.
I saw an example in Sarah's school. I think your co-teacher was doing a geometry lesson with tessellations, but before the kids came into the room that day, she had set up 4 or 5 sort of stations in her room that provided different access points into that material, depending on where they were at in their interest level, their understanding. So they were all working on the same concept, but they had choices, including special education students who maybe wanted to draw or work one-on-one with an aide, others working in a group and really high level kind of creating their own art out of it, and others working with tiles that they could put together, depending on their drawing skills. They didn't all have to access it the same way, and I thought that was a great example of it. But can you guys talk just a little bit more about that tension between our traditional notion is that kids kind of enter school and they move together grade by grade based kind of on their age, and that's broken down a little bit with homeschooling, with early college, with a lot of other aspects within education. But when you're in a school and you're trying to plan a schedule, I remember that the main thing that kept coming up when I talked to educators about this is that it can be really challenging to reinvent your schedule to accommodate this shift in thinking. So can you just talk a little bit about how you've done that in your schools?
I think you've hit upon the biggest challenge of that. And really, one thing that we're working on at our school is really pulling apart the competencies and kind of looking at it like a pathway. So once a student has shown that they're competent maybe at a 3rd grade level, what is the next skill? So what would be a competent at the 4th grade level? And what you will find is that, any given skill, you might have students operating at an 8th grade level and other students operating maybe at a 2nd grade level. And how do you bridge that gap? And I think that is the most challenging part of teaching in that model. But I've found some success, when you're doing rotations, when you're doing centers, when you're meeting with kids, using blended learning. Those are some different strategies that I've used in my classroom.
Blended meaning you're using some technology programs to help meet them at their level, their skill level?
Absolutely, yep. We use Google Suites a lot, Google Classroom. In my classroom, we've used Khan Academy. So using the Khan Academy as an example. So if I'm working with my students on fractions, and so the lesson of the day is fractions, I might have some students who are looking at equivalent fractions. I might have students who are looking at addition and subtraction of fractions, and then I might have others who are doing multiplication and division. So you can have kind of that centralized lesson, and then maybe meet with the kids who are struggling, let the kids who are ready to move on to the next level go off independently. Khan Academy usually has some great videos that the kids can watch, and then a practice activity. And what's great about that too is you can watch it over and over, you can pause it, you can try it. There's other great resources like that than just the activities that you have out there to support and help them access it.
And Stacy, I can add that one of the things that we are not only looking at more so in Manchester this year, but one of the tenets of our model is the fact that we don't have levels in our school, because that allows other students to rise. You're all equals in this classroom, because even most people find that even when you do have leveling, that there's such a disparity in what where students are at anyway, that we're all in this together. And like we say, students have different areas of expertise even within themselves. Some students, even within special education students, may have certain things that they're just amazing at. So the fact that we don't level allows those students to shine and to rise to the occasion, and the teacher becomes more of the facilitator of all of the activity that's going on, and we allow the students to be able to work together more and to shine in some of those areas where they feel they're confident. And so not having levels does help. And no matter what, the teacher is obviously very engaged with those students, but trying to be more of the facilitator of the learning.
I think at the elementary level, what's changed from maybe when I started teaching was that you had the A group, the B group, the C group, and the group that you started in is usually the group that you ended in. And what we're finding now is that your groupings are fluid. Depending on the skill, depending on how quickly they're learning it, you might just pull 3 kids to just reinforce a certain skill, or you might pull 4 kids to kind of enrich a certain skill. So the groupings are different than they used to be, for sure. It's very fluid and ever-changing.
I was going to ask Hope, did you want to add anything in terms of, do you have any examples of how you feel like your teachers or anybody has helped personalize your education to help you engage in certain subjects?
My French teacher this past year, she knows that I'm in video production, and she knows that we do like photography. And she knows that I get busy with that along with my other classes. Mm-hmm. So for a project for me, for like one of my bigger grades, she gave me like a book that had like a bunch of different like pictures of things in it, and I had to recreate that book, like take pictures, but put like everything in French. Mm-hmm. So like she made up that project specifically for me, because she knows that that's something that like I'm good at and that like I do, and yeah.
That's a great example. Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience here? Yeah. We'll just wait just a minute, and you'll get a mic.
Yes. Hi, I'm Diana Terrell. I'm a teacher educator here at St. Anselm College. My colleague is here too. One of the biggest sets of pushback, I guess, or narratives in the pushback against competency-based learning is that it's absent of content. So people who are concerned about prioritizing content or the canon, or are the kids learning the great works and that kind of thing. So I'm sure you have a lot of examples of how content comes across in your classroom, and I would love to hear about that.
Thank you.
I can talk about some of the things that we do. We are extremely creative, and actually the teachers have become extremely creative of, we call like combining classes together to make everything relevant. And one of the classes that we have is humanities, for example, where the English teacher works with the social studies teacher. And now we're actually even combining in art. And because we don't like to have these silos, so when a student can engage in things that are similar and and they can obviously apply it, it makes it so much more relevant to the student. Our English teachers and our social studies teachers will cooperate together, and they'll look at either a historical period and add the literature to that, or just the opposite. A teacher will say, I want to cover this book because this is a really important piece. You tell me how you're going to add the historical, whether it be economics, geography, whatever it is, aspect to that. And just this past year, we've tried that with math and science, and it was absolutely fantastic. We had our manufacturing teacher who was teaching physical science with a math teacher who used to be an engineer, and we combined the subjects together, and it worked amazing. The students were so engaged, and I keep on telling anybody there's nothing like seeing a student learn about heat and how different components work together than giving them a blowtorch and having it light up in front of them and saying, like, I said, they'll never forget that lesson, but that's what it is. It really goes back to also applying those lessons.
I was in that class this year. It was the first time we ever did that. And I mean, there was a lot of things about it that like I could apply to the real world. Like, we went into the manufacturing classroom, and like I learned how to build a bike. Like, one of our projects was they gave us a bunch of stuff and was just build a bike. And I thought that was really cool. And that's also like my physical science grade. So it was fun. Like, I got to build a bike, and we got to make pendulums out of like someone did like toothpicks and gumdrops. Like, it was just, we did like fun projects like that. And yeah, it was really cool. I liked how we combined math and physical science because I feel like they do go together very well, and I feel like the class could like get better in the upcoming years, and I hope we continue to do that because I definitely did learn a lot from that course this past year.
You know, it's an interesting question. It's one that's brought up often. Are we going to lose content when we go into this work? And it's always curious to me in that we can't talk about application of nothing. And so there has to be content that's in there that students are manipulating and understanding and trying to work through. But the irony here is even if we could agree on the canon, we couldn't cover the canon. And so right now we have a system that people look and say, well, there's all this content that's in there, but let's admit it. We don't cover all of it, and everything we cover, kids don't learn. And so there's this false perception out there that kids are getting the content now when we know that's actually not true. We average things in, we go over things, we skip over things, we pick and choose those pieces there. So let's agree that concept is actually flawed. The fullness of that is a flawed concept. So then we look at that and say, let's look at it in ways of kids understanding it, bringing ideas to life for them, manipulating those pieces. They actually get that stuff. They understand that stuff there. But it's important just to be clear, we're not saying it's a content neutral strategy or a void strategy, but that it is about both the content so that kids know things, can manipulate those. I mean, you can't have deep thoughts about nothing to get towards those ends.
Yeah, and I think of a couple of different things as you were speaking, really thinking of it less as like wide and shallow, but narrower and deep. I find that I'm given permission a little bit more to do more rich, deep projects. So I did a lengthy project on the hero's journey with 3rd and 4th graders. And I think that's typically reserved for middle school and high school. But they were ready for it, bringing it to their level, looking at both literature, movies, just these common stories, and they can do these things. They can access that material. I've done Shakespeare with younger kids, and it's really the competencies in using that model gives you permission to look at your students and who do I have in front of me today, rather than, okay, every single year 3rd grade is going to do this, 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 and this. What's relevant to them? What will engage them? What will create this passion within them to learn? And I find it gives me permission to do deeper, richer content level activities.
I think we have another question coming in from our Facebook audience.
Yeah, so this is actually from Twitter, from Bobby, a high school principal in Ohio. And he asks, what role does literacy, improving reading, writing, and speaking, play in personalized learning and deeper learning?
Anyone want to start with that?
I can say that the fact that our students are constantly having to work through different models and edits. We do work on Google, and our students submit their work to the teacher, and the teachers are constantly giving them feedback and turning it back in. So the fact that it's not, I passed it in, I got a C. Okay, that's it, end of it. It's not that way. So when a student submits their work, they have to go in, they have to correct, they have to get feedback. The minimum that they can get on it is a 3, and they have to obviously keep on going until they get mastery or proficiency. And the fact that they have to become proficient, and it's through that process of not just accepting a certain grade, it's always improving. And even when our students get a 3, there are many students that say, I'm not happy with the 3. I want a 3.5. I want a 4. And the fact that they are inspired to go back and continue. And again, literacy, a lot of people think, oh, that's the English class. We do literacy in all of our classes. It doesn't matter if you're in a math class, if you're in a CTE program. Students have to read and write, and they have to be able to become literate, even whether it's a manual, whether it's something that they have to be able to do diagnostics in automotive. That means that they have to be literate in all areas, so it's not just in English.
I think that's a crucial point you bring up there too, that what we're seeing more and more is when you get clear about those standards, everybody understand those pieces. And so the literacy piece, for example, it is interesting that we have historically put that into the English class when reading happens in every class, writing happens in every class. And now it opens it up when we're clear that that's a standard and expectation, as you've noted, that I am the science teacher and I'm talking about what does it mean to read well scientifically? What does it mean to write well scientifically,
Right.
to expand that concept?
Right.
I'm teaching third grade, and that's really the year where students go from learning to read to reading to learn. And it's a real pivotal year, and really trying to find for those reluctant readers and those reluctant writers, what is the draw, what is the purpose for why I'm reading, why I'm writing. And if you give them that real authentic experience that really relates to something that they're engaged in, that they're passionate about, that maybe it's just in their wheelhouse, you can, keeping in mind the competencies, build on those skills, personalizing it to their interests, and it's one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah. I think a related question to that we wanted to talk about today was the idea of assessment, and how, in this kind of approach, how are you assessing whether they're actually mastering the skills that you want them to master? How are you assigning those? You talked about 3s on a 1 to 4 grading scale, and I'm not sure what kind of scale you use in your school, but talk a little bit about that.
We certainly use rubrics that are based on our competencies, but our school, our district, and across New Hampshire, we're really moving more towards performance assessment tasks. So those can be on a grander scale, they can be on a smaller scale, but really giving students those embedded real-world, hands-on experiences, and then assessing them through that work rather than through standardized testing or multiple choice or worksheets. That's one way that we're assessing. We're really looking, and you can do this more through projects, at multiple ways that students can demonstrate that they have a skill. Is it through creating a video? Is it through listening to them read aloud and then posting it in Seesaw or something like that? Is it creating a poster? So really, not just looking for teachable moments, but looking for accessible moments, that it doesn't have to be, okay, on Friday we're going to take a quiz. Another thing that's really important is, if you're going to assess it, to let the students know ahead of time. So these are the skills that we're working on. This is what we want you to accomplish. And it might be sharing the rubric with them ahead of time. It might even be creating the rubric with them. But when students know what they are supposed to learn, that's really beneficial.
Stacy, if I might share a really clear, I think it's a clear assessment dilemma, is that so a student shows up in high school and is bilingual. And so the student speaks Spanish fluently, it's been spoken in the home, understands Spanish. And yet we don't give that student credit for Spanish because the student didn't sit through the Spanish class. That doesn't pass the straight face test. The student understands Spanish. We should somehow recognize that's there. So bearing that in mind, I think the core piece that's starting to happen is we're moving from this notion of a test-based system to an evidence-based system. And so we're looking at what is the evidence that I can gather that can demonstrate what students know and are able to do, as opposed to what are the hoops, the assessment hoops that I may have created that they jumped through that were there. And so to get to that end, we need to, when we think about personalizing, we need to think about kind of 3 different pieces of this. One is, what's the learning task that a student does? And we can be relatively open with that, about the task. The second one is, what is the demonstration process that the student goes through to demonstrate that? We can get into the performance assessment strategies that come in there. And the third one is, what's the criteria by which we're going to judge that it's good enough? Okay, so again, the student who shows up who speaks Spanish well, is that the equivalent of Spanish 1? Is that the equivalent of Spanish 2? Is that the equivalent of these skills or these standards of Spanish? So we've got to get really clear about what we mean by that performance expectation And we can be very open with the learning task and the demonstration task if we can get clear about that end piece, so that it's about the evidence of learning more so than it is the specific process that we may have laid out for learning. To be clear, that doesn't mean that we give up on the process we developed for learning, because we still want to develop that to help kids, to support kids, as you've heard from folks here, to get to that, but we don't want to be tied just to that one way.
No. Do we have any other questions from the audience? We've got one over here.
Thank you. So each of you have education in common, but each of you have something unique about education. You have a student, a teacher, an administrator, etc. So I wonder what you individually think about school choice. If you had the opportunity as a student to go anywhere, is that good or bad? If you are a teacher and your students could be from anywhere, is that good or bad? Etc.
I can take that because our school is a school of choice for MST High School. All of the students that come to us for the high school portion of it, for their academics, they should have or could have gone to a number of other schools. And they come to our school because of those certain tenets of the model that we have set up for them. So I feel we do deal with competition, for sure. We have to make sure that students understand what we have to offer, because we always say it's not the right fit for everyone. If a student wants to sit at a desk and open a textbook and that's their model of learning, then we're not the place for them. But if they want to be independent, if they want to be able to go faster if they want, or if they take more time, there are certain things that they have to look at. And so I feel in a way that competition is good because we have to prove ourselves. And every year that pushes us to become better and better. And every year we continually work to become better and better. Because I know the first year that we opened as a high school, it was quite a challenge because we did not have a long time to be prepared, and it was new. We had nothing. We had no model to go on that was anything like what we had. So that forces us as a school to continually strive to be better, to prove ourselves, to make sure that we are the best place for students. I feel that we are an outstanding school for students. Are we the right fit for everyone? Absolutely not. But for those students that have to learn in a different way, we are an outstanding school. But we always have to make sure that we're doing things that are in the best. I mean, it always has to be, it's for the best of the students. But so that competition factor out there, that if we see that, you know, we don't have as many students coming, why? Why is that? What's going on here? And we're constantly looking at that. But we're making sure that everything that we do is for the best of the student.
And just to clarify, you are a part of the Manchester City School District.
Yes, we are a public high school, but again, we are a choice. Students don't have to come to us. They could go to any one of the other high schools. So the fact that they come to us, we're very glad that they are getting the benefits of our model.
I think there's a fine balance that we need to strike with school choice. I mean, I certainly appreciate that I have choice for where my own kids go to school. In Rochester, we've got, you know, our neighborhood school. We've got the magnet school. There's also a charter school in Dover that, you know, if you chose to you could send your kids to. And I agree, you know, having a model, it will work for some kids, but not for others. And I think the thing that we always need to be mindful of is our job is to educate all children, and is in creating choice. Are you benefiting students even that don't go to your school? So like our school, we're the first magnet school in the state, and we were kind of created, you know, with the mindset of small change can lead to big change. So we wanted to try it on a small level, project-based learning, French instruction. We go to school 200 days. Rather than 180. And the goal has always been, how can we then expand it to our other schools in our district? So, you know, I'm not just responsible for the students in my class, I'm part of a larger district. And we always need to make sure that by having this choice, we're not taking something away from other kids. And I think that's the balance that we always need to keep in mind.
So let me start with a couple of caveats here. I think it's a more complex question than choice or no choice. And I would say, in general, I want options to be open for kids to take advantage of any learning they can take advantage of. I want them to be able to do internships. I want them to be able to do dual enrollment. I want them to do project-based learning. I'm supportive of all those pieces. There's a couple caveats there, though. I want to make sure that choice is available for every kid, not just those who are economically advantaged to be able to do that. And that's one of the concerns I have, is that we open up choice and some families and children are able to take advantage of it, but others aren't. That seems basically unfair to me. The second piece we have to think about is, while there is an individual component of education, it is a system of learning that we as a society have put into place to better society and individuals. And so we have to weigh both the individual and the overall society. And I think we can do that in a way that are not disadvantaged to either one. I'm not saying we have to discredit one to credit the other, but I think we can do both of those pieces. And then I think we need to move the choice question to a deeper level, not just as much as a choice of where I'm going to learn, but a choice of how I'm going to learn. And so an example of that, in the spring of the majority of high schools, with some exceptions to that, we talk about what are the courses kids want to take, and they sign up for courses, and they get some of these choices for some of these electives they take in the spring. But come September, their choice is over. So you elected to take the Shakespeare course with me as an elective to English 11 or junior year English or whatever it might be. But now I'm going to tell you the plays you're going to read, I'm going to tell you the schedule it's going to be on, I'm going to tell you how you're going to read that, I'm going to tell you what the assessments are going to be. So your choice happened in March, but your choice about learning doesn't actually materialize, it's there. And so we need to move the choice question from where do I learn to how do I learn, to deepen that knowledge piece on that. And I would end by saying, in general, I'm a big believer in choice and student agency to make that happen, but it is within the confines and the context of the overall picture.
I think we have just a few more minutes left in our hour and another online question. Yeah, it is going by fast. We'll be able to continue with the discussion on the Facebook page. People can...
I wanted to...
okay, we're going to... go ahead.
I wanted to answer and reflect on what she said about having students come from other places, because it's a choice to come to MST. As a student, I definitely appreciate that, having students from other cities, because the majority of the students who choose to go to MST are students who want to learn just as much as I do, and they have the same, at a public high school, a lot of the kids don't care, and they become distractions in the classroom. But at MST, all the kids choose to go there, and they know it's a privilege to be there. So they all care and they focus, and it helps me as a student because I don't get distracted with students who don't care as much as I do. At MST, almost everyone has the same passion for learning, and I definitely appreciate that, and I wish more schools would be like that.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, Gretel, question?
Yeah, so this is a question for Hope from Facebook, and there's also a follow-up question if we have time. So this person says, Hope, you spoke a bit about being able to move at your own pace, which is great. Are you also able to choose the projects based on your own interests so you can learn content in a context that matters to you?
Do I get to choose my own projects? No, in most of my classes, they have a set, this is what you do to pass the class. So you do have to kind of do what's set for you to do in a way. I don't really choose my projects, I suppose, but being able to do those certain projects at my own pace and the way I would do it definitely does help. But there is kind of a standard that everyone does this thing, but you can do it as fast or as slow as you want. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you have 2 more years to go. Is Karen, as they get older, do they sometimes have a little more of the self-created project opportunities?
And part of the way that we work the whole self-pace also allows students to go as fast as they want. We've had students that have graduated in only 3 years because their whole premise was they wanted to get out, get on, and go to college. So our students can go faster if they want to, and we're finding that more of the students, because they see so much benefit with apprenticeships and internships, now they're saying, why do I want to go and pay for money, pay for things in college when I can actually do the same experience here? So some of the students are actually taking us up on the offer of doing more internships or extended learning opportunities within the school itself.
The self-paced learning really, really works for some students. I know a freshman, she's now about to be a sophomore. She came in her freshman year and she did Algebra 1, and halfway through the year she finished, and then started geometry just halfway through the year, and then finished geometry by the end of the year, and is doing Algebra 2 on VLAX over the summer. And then as a sophomore, she's going to be in pre-calculus, so as a junior, she can be in calculus. And I think that's really cool that some students can go fast and finish all these different courses at their own pace, because this girl is clearly really smart. And I think that's amazing that she's going to be in pre-calculus as a sophomore, and I wish I could have done that. But that's an opportunity that all students who come to MST have, and I think that's really cool.
Any quick follow-ups? We just last few minutes here.
Yeah, a quick related follow-up question. This is also for Hope. I'll bet you know some of your fellow students, maybe not in your personal academic or social group, who are flailing. What do you think they need to make a difference to turn their academic experience around?
So, do you know examples of students who are struggling with sort of the self-paced aspect and falling behind, and what do you think could improve their experience?
I made a whole post on Facebook about it, telling incoming freshmen. At MST, it is self-paced, and that, like I said before, it really works for some people. But some people it really doesn't work, because some people think there's no due date for this. I can just put it off and do it later. And I know multiple students and I'm guilty of doing this as well, just saying, I can do it tomorrow. And then it becomes April, the school year's almost over, and you're like, oh my goodness, I have no time to finish this class. And you have 2 months to struggle and go as fast as you can to finish a class. And some students don't end up finishing and have to retake the course. So that does happen to a lot of students. So I suggest that if you're going to go to a self-paced school, you need to be able to kick your own butt and tell yourself you need to do your homework, because it does become kind of a hassle when you have no time to do your work. That's definitely a problem that we have at MST with some students.
And that was one of the things that we have put a lot of emphasis on, and a lot of work and a lot of thought into this past year. It was the fact of looking at, and again, we completely have to be data driven to look at how are our students doing, what is going on. We started a freshman seminar class just for that main factor of those students. When they say as slow as you need, it's more like, okay, now you really have to get something done, because they have to have their own self-discipline, and if they don't, so we put a lot more parameters around the fact that, if you get to March and you haven't done anything, I'm sorry, you're not going to take it up in summer school. We've said that, in order to do competency recovery, you have to have done so much work in order to, be able to just take some other competencies. You have to have gained so many competencies because of that factor.
It seems to me that gives you the opportunity to help students build those skills that really are, this is what we're talking about, when they go to college or to a job, they're going to need that kind of time management and self-discipline. So to be talking about it and working on it in the high school setting seems to make a lot of sense in terms of preparing for the future. I think we're at the end of our hour. We have, what, are you signaling me another question or just one more minute? One more question. Okay, sorry. Just working with our moderators over here online to squeeze in one more question before we finish up. And then our live audience, you're welcome to stay and chat a little longer afterwards if you want as well. Go ahead.
Okay, so to wrap up, we have a question. What anecdotes do you have about how your programs have caught the interest of educators around the country?
I know some of you have.
Yes, we have visitors very frequently. We've had a group of teachers from Texas that are looking at our competency-based education model. We've had delegates from Washington, D.C., and in New Hampshire, we've got this program called NG Squared, No Grades, No Grades, and they have this innovation studio, and we've hosted educators from all around New Hampshire that are looking at project-based learning, performance assessment tasks in relation to competencies. And so our doors are always open at Maple Street Magnet School for visitors, if anyone's ever interested.
And we've had the same as after our story came out with the Christian Science Monitor, as well as we've had a few other publications this year, and every single time we get people calling and emailing, and how can we get in on this, and can you come, and can we come? And so they're really seeing the success that we have as an answer to some of the issues that they're having in their own schools. And I've heard from Chicago and Ohio, and somebody up in Whistler up in Canada, and so it's wonderful to see other people benefiting from our ideas.
Well, thanks everyone so much. It's been a great conversation. We might continue it more here in person a little bit. In our online audience, you can continue to send in comments on Facebook, and we'll try to tune in there and reply as best we can. And let's just thank all of our panelists and everyone behind the scenes. Check us out at CS Monitor/EqualEd online. Are we safely no longer live? Waiting for the signal.
I think we could have gone 2 hours.
Yeah. It did go by fast, didn't it?
Really fast.
Closer to the time it was about to end, I was like more confident to actually talk, and then right when I wanted